It's um it's difficult to know how to intro this particular video, but I guess we'll just be upfront about it. Hi, my name is Vera. I like video games. I also like porn. And as a result of that, I happen to be a fan of porny video games. And it's something that I just like and also would like to talk about, but kind of can't, or at least felt like I couldn't. The reality is, at this point, this particular channel, the majority of what I put out is already age restricted. Now, to be clear, I am going to actually try and talk about this and present it in a way that might not be age restricted. I'm aiming for that, but even if it isn't age restricted, it's not a topic that really fits my other channels. It's arguably not really one that fits here either. My geeky stuff generally shows up on Council of Geeks or Break Room of Geeks. But, I'm pretty upfront about sexually related stuff here. And so I figured this is where it makes the most sense. Now, we'll see, be putting versions of the videos intended for this series up on another site, the one that is only for fans as well, because anything that I show from games here is going to be very carefully censored. But having said that, before I can just launch into talking about specific games, because I have a number of them in mind that I know I want to talk about, and I guarantee there'll be more in the future, I first just kind of want to talk about the broad topic, or at least my approach to it, because porn video games is a pretty big category, actually. There's a lot out there, and a lot of it doesn't super appeal to me. I mean, I suppose that's true of porn of any nature, to be completely honest. It appeals to such a broad palette that, there's going to be a fair bit that I'm like, okay, not for me. And it's also the case here. Part of what I want to do with this sort of introduction to the topic is to lay out what you can expect to hear me talk about so that people, if they feel like, say, for instance, making suggestions for stuff for me to try, can tailor those suggestions more to what I am liable to actually enjoy. So, a couple of things. I mentioned I like video games, and when I say video games, I mean proper games. I don't mean to imply that visual novels or walking simulators aren't real games. They are, but that's not really what I engage with, because those aren't genres I particularly enjoy. I enjoy the mechanics, I enjoy the gameplay, and while you can absolutely create a valid gaming experience through just making choices, dating sims, visual novels, walking simulators, they're just not my genres. They're just not. And those are genres that have a very large footprint in porn games. There's a lot of visual novels. There is a lot of, just dating sims. And that's fine. Not going to be what I talk about. Also, broadly speaking, in terms of visual styling, I tend to not favor, and I'm not going to say that these are hard lines, but broadly speaking, I enjoy 2D hand-drawn art, and I enjoy pixel art for this sort of thing. I don't especially enjoy the fully rendered 3D semi-realistic kind of look. I say semi because it's certainly not photoreal. These developers who make this kind of thing can't afford to do stuff like that. But there is this generic kind of 3D model thing that a fair number of these games do. I don't especially like that. And also, I'm not especially partial to the anime art style. Not that I have anything against anime or don't think anime can be sexy. That one's an issue of oversaturation. It's a go-to for a lot of these games. So while that's not an automatic disqualifier for me, it is gonna need to have more to offer me to make up for that art style. Then I guess that brings me to, what is it that I actually want out of things like this? Well, here's the thing. For me, while I like porny games, for me, the porn is an aesthetic. it's not necessarily the full reason I'm here. Because if I just wanted porn, I can just look up porn. I don't need to play a game to get porn. But as an aesthetic, I actually quite like it, especially if it's over an otherwise solid gaming experience. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about are things where the mechanics, it's not the deepest thing in the world, but the mechanics are perfectly solid. And it could have easily been done with an aesthetic of, dark gothicness, sort of a Souls-like kind of aesthetic. It easily could have been done with a cyberpunk aesthetic. It could have been done with, talking anthropomorphic animals and been all chibi and cute kind of aesthetic. But I'm opting for having it with a porn aesthetic. And I guess the other thing that I want to say that I personally favor, and I try and say this without judgment, there is a type that is, again, very common that I personally largely try to avoid. Because there's a lot of these games, even when you've got something that, like, it's got gameplay and, like, the pornographic elements are just sort of, where otherwise there might be a shortcut scene, here you're getting porn. Where in other games there might be, like, an army of goblins. Here it's an army of naked people. Like, I like that kind of thing. But where it can lose me is that a lot of them deal with non-consent scenes. Now, I don't have an inherent 100% bias against non-consent scenes. I certainly don't judge anyone who does like them. But when it comes to this kind of thing, I like, and this is going to sound like a weird word to use in regards to porn, whether it's in games or otherwise, but there's a certain kind of innocence that I like when I can find it. What I mean by that is I'm old. By the standards of the internet. So my sort of formative years of first getting to see porn was back in the 90s, where while you could start to get stuff that was just compilations of scenes altogether, there was still that lingering thing from decades previous where the movies had to have plots. Not good plots, not interesting plots, not well acted, but a plot of some kind. And the thing is, a lot of those, if you've ever seen them or did watch them back in the day, there was a playfulness and a weird kind of innocence to them. It was as if they existed in an alternate reality where basically everybody's just down to have sex, basically whenever the opportunity arises. It was presented in this fashion where, like, basically two people could just look at each other and be like, hey. And that was enough. And everyone was down for it. And there was a joyfulness, a playfulness to it that I like and I kind of miss. One of the things that has kind of really overtaken porn in general is a sense of coercion, of tricking people, of taking advantage of situations. There's a reason, sort of one of the things that you make fun of if you're trying to parody modern porn is like, oh no, she's stuck under the bed and somebody found her. Well, like, that's somebody taking advantage of the situation. And like, this problem has expanded out, but it goes back decades. I remember early 2000s, or I guess mid 2000s, where like the notion of audition tapes was a thing, where like there were these videos of women coming into the office of somebody who makes porn to audition, and the audition was they would film a sex scene. And like, that's perfectly fine. That's a totally solid, like, not particularly much of a story sort of premise. Here's the thing. Those videos, at least for a while, all started with a text thing that said there isn't actually a modeling opportunity for these women. Its core premise was trickery and coercion. And I feel like that and stuff like, again, if you're old enough to remember any of this stuff like Bang Bus and a lot of Brazzers output, is it Brazzers or Brazers? I don't know, whatever they are. A lot of their output leans into this notion of, at least initially, starting from a position of somebody, usually the woman, got tricked, got coerced, got blackmailed. And when the scene starts, maybe it'll show them, well, usually, actually, it'll show them getting really into it. It still starts from that core notion of they didn't voluntarily get into this situation. And again, if that works for you, that's fine. I'm not judging you. But I'm really kind of tired of it. And I miss the playfulness. I miss the weird sort of innocence of things like, oh, here's a car dealership where like the salespeople have sex with the clients just because they're in the same room, basically. That's not even a joke. I actually quite distinctly remember that one. So that's something that I look for. And while that is hard to find as a specific, it also should give you an idea of what I try to avoid, which is when I'm scrolling through, the video trailers or the screenshots, if I spot, things where it looks like somebody, again, generally a woman, looks like she's in distress. And if there's text on the screen saying, no, don't, please stop, or anything like that, I'm going to give it a pass. And that's helped me a bit. I've still tried out some games that kind of snuck it in there. And there was one I tried a few months back. I'm like, this is decent. And the coercion wasn't the worst I'd seen, but it was enough that the gameplay wasn't good enough for me to keep putting up with it. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind in terms of what I'll be interested in and looking at. And another thing that kind of goes hand in hand with that is I want something that, and this is going to sound, again, weird for porn, that has put some thought, even if it is silly, goofy, nonsensical thought, into the logic of what they're doing. Because there are times when the porn actually clashes with the gameplay. Here's one of the things that I mean by that. It's not uncommon for a fair amount of these games, especially if the player character is a woman. The porn comes when you lose. Like when you lose, and there was one, I cannot remember the name of it now. It was some sort of tower defense survivors kind of game. And when you lost, when your tower was destroyed by the army of minotaurs and orcs and everything else, there was then a scene of your heroic character being basically passed around and used by the opposing army. And that's kind of messed up, not just for the lack of consent, but just mechanically. The porn's part of the appeal. You're really messing up the incentive set if you're giving people part of what they're here for when they lose. Like that to me just shows a lack of forethought into what you're doing. That to me just says you're just throwing porn into an established game style and you're not really thinking about it. You can actually find stuff that clearly has more care and more thought put into it. And that's the stuff I plan to highlight. If I come across stuff that I don't like, I'm unlikely to talk about it. But when I come across stuff that makes me smile and just has that joy to sex, yeah. If it's also a good game on top of that, I'm going to want to talk about it. And I'm carving this out as a place where I will do that. How regularly will I have these out? I don't know. I'm going to try and have one for you next week so that you don't have to wait too long to see what an actual proper episode of this is going to look like. I don't expect this to do exceptionally well, but I'm also making a promise to myself to not sink too much time into it so that it can be something that I just do for fun. Because again, I find these games and they're fun and they're cute and they're silly and they're sexy. And then I have nobody to talk with them about. So I'm going to talk with you folks about them. And I hope you'll join me for that. So that's my thought and approach and what I like out of porny games and what you can expect from this series. So thank you very much. And I hope you'll have fun with this. I certainly intend to. Just remember that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved.